What is up, guys? The infamous Madden YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to try out something completely new here on the channel. We are actually going to be listening to the Making Madden podcast. And the reason that I wanted to do that is that we are actually going to be listening today to basically the playtest feedback, and we're going to be listening to various Madden NFL gameplay devs talking about that feedback, what changes are going to be made, what changes are not going to be made, and just kind of give a raw, unfiltered first reaction. I swear I have not listened to this, so let's go ahead and get straight into it. If you guys like this video, please let me know in the comments if you guys want me to do more of these style videos, these podcast style formats, talking about the state of Madden and things of that nature. Definitely let me know. I'm always open to new suggestions here on the channel outside of just doing your standard tips every single day. But let's go ahead and get right into it, man. Let's go ahead and listen. This was done on August the 5th. I'm going to include, if you guys want to listen to the podcast on your own, it is available all over. Any place you go get your podcast, it is available. I've included those links from EA directly in the description. I am going to say this. I have been a big time critic of Madden. I always try to go into every single year with an open mind. So for those of you that are here for rage or anything like that, I don't think we're going to hit that by any stretch, but I will be giving my honest and unfiltered feedback as we listen to it the first time through. Obviously, if you guys are watching in the gym, in your car, wherever you are, you guys don't have to necessarily be looking at your phones. You're just going to be looking at my ugly mug the entire time as we kind of break this down. I will be pausing to give feedback. That way I'm not talking over what they're talking. I want you guys to be able to hear everything along with my initial response. Let's go ahead and get straight into it.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of the Making Madden podcast. I'm Tom Lischke, franchise producer, and with me is Andre Weingarten, franchise designer and ESPN frontman.
This week we have gameplay producer and ESPN superstar Clint Oldenburg back with us, along with senior designer Nick Farah, to go over the changes that we made from the community playtest feedback in both franchise and gameplay.
So let's get into it. Clint and Nick, welcome, and thanks for being our guests on the podcast today.
Yes, thank you. We love when gameplay has a few folks with you all today to join the franchise talk.
Kind of counterbalancing it out a little bit this time, huh?
Yeah, Nick, why don't you say a few words?
I mean, I feel a little outclassed with all these ESPN megastars around me.
We'll hold our own, Nick. It'll be okay.
Just the guy that makes video games.
I know. Well, I've got a face made for radio, so I'm happy to not be out there on network TV. But
you've got this great broadcasting host voice, though. You know,
thanks, buddy.
So maybe they Tom.
Appreciate it.
Yes, that's Nick. Hello, welcome, Nick.
Happy to be here.
So let's get into it. You know, we just wrapped up the community playtest not so long ago. We saw big numbers come through in playing the game. For me, it's really, that's an exciting time of year. We've been working all year long, and now we've been playing the game, and it kind of feels like we're off and isolated and doing it. We're doing our best, but that first chance to share the game with the gamers, let them play it and get us some feedback. We did it a little differently this year. I think it was sooner and more raw. A lot of the discussion that we had going into it this year is what do we call it? Because in past years, we framed it as a beta. Beta implies, you're really close to the finished product. There's not really time to make changes or take feedback or do very much. Maybe you fix a few bugs. This year, even the title changed, and that was one of the things that we talked a lot about. Well, we got to call it something different. We're giving gamers a version of the game that's much earlier in the dev cycle, and it might not have felt that much earlier because it was in the summer, but the difference of a couple weeks or even a month is a big difference that time of year in terms of what we can really take out of that play session and the feedback we get. So
I want to go ahead and chime in on that. What Tom is saying is that what they gave us is a little bit closer to not necessarily an alpha, but it's definitely not as deep into a beta as what we play tested. Now, me personally, when I played the beta, I honestly thought, as somebody that's been involved in dev cycles before, used to travel to EA as an EA Sports game changer, participate in community events and see the game in alpha state, in beta state, and also the capture event that's, the week or two before launch of the game, where we were allowed to get early content for our YouTube channels. I honestly was pleasantly surprised with the way the beta played. You guys listened to my beta feedback video, and I honestly did think that it was a a deeper part of the dev cycle. And what they're saying is actually that it was earlier. So that gives me a little bit of a cause for optimism, truthfully. So let's go ahead and keep listening here.
Clint, I know next gen player movement was a big piece of the focus this year. So what'd you see in the playtest? What do you think about how it was used and the feedback we got?
Yeah, so first, I want to start by saying thank you to all the players who participated in the playtest. Y'all out there don't know how important it is for us to get real world feedback for all the stuff we've been building. You know, bugs aside, like Tom said, it was really early and we wanted to make sure that we had enough time to react to the feedback, and y'all really supplied us with a lot of great feedback. So to answer your question directly, Tom, relative to player movement, for the second year in a row, now that we're on Generation 5 consoles, it was one of the most voted topics of the playtest. There was almost 500 different votes about next-gen player movement, and it ran the whole spectrum. When I say votes, it wasn't just up votes, it wasn't just down votes, it was both. It ran the whole spectrum of player movement feels too slow, all the way to player movement is really authentic, I love it, don't change it. And so it's quite polarizing. And we really expected that because there's a lot of players that are experiencing Gen 5 for the first time this year. And one thing that we wanted to make sure to tell our players is that while there's a lot of feedback in there that's super valuable that we tuned, like separating faster players and slower players, we believe that next-gen player movement, which is built on the back of data, next-gen stats coming from the NFL fields, is what's best for our players and what's best for our game. So there's not going to be a massive pivot in our model of player movement for Madden 23. However, like I said, we are going to continue to tune and take feedback to improve what's there. We know it's a significant change from what everyone's used to on Gen 4, especially on the defensive side of the ball, but we think it provides a more balanced and realistic gameplay experience. And then I'm going to stop talking so much now, but there are a few notes on player movement I want to make sure that we're able to tell the players, but I want to let Andre and Tom jump in here before I take up all of our airspace.
All right, so what you guys heard Clint say right there is that they don't have massive plans to pivot with this. And he mentioned Madden 23. Madden 22 is what is coming out here. So for those of us that were upset with what we felt in the beta, I will come out and say I played a fair amount of Madden 21 Next Gen in the month of July in preparation for 22's launch. Little self flex right here. You guys can check out my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/ZanMadden. I was actually the third most watched Madden streamer in the month of July. So I was definitely logging in the time. You guys know my chief complaint with Madden 21 Next Gen is they keep referencing that this is built on the back of data. And really, when you play the game, the thing that stood out on 21 Next Gen to me was that I would like to see what data they keep referencing, simply because when you take a guy like Lamar Jackson and you put him in the pocket and you see, a big defensive tackle like Albert Haynesworth shed a interior offensive lineman and start to get to the quarterback, and you see that animation occurring in front of you, and it takes Lamar so much time to even escape the pocket, and that's with the escape artist, to run away from a bigger defensive tackle that weighs sometimes, 60, 70, 80, even almost 100 pounds more than a guy like Lamar, it raises questions. When the ball is in your hands with a guy like Barry Sanders and he can't really get away from a player with natural stick movement as opposed to just rolling dice on a ball carrier move, that raises cause for concern. I definitely can see it in the routes in 21. Again, we're talking Madden 21 here. I can see it in the routes when the receivers are rounding off their routes, and I get that that's kind of the data that they're getting at, talking about the player movement. And you could see that, but that same receiver and the way that he moves running his route, once the ball's in his hands, I don't think anybody can argue that it's data driven. So that's kind of my feedback at this point in time. And again, that's Madden 21 feedback. I would honestly go to say that, this is one of those topics that truthfully is, it's pretty polarizing, like Clint said. I don't fully believe that the majority of the movement that you see in the game is truly data driven, but 22's beta did feel better to me, especially in the user control movement. And I'm sure they'll touch on that. So let's go ahead and keep rolling here.
We'll jump in, Andre.
You did the exact thing in the production meeting you told us not to do, Clint. to put both names out there. But yeah, I mean, from the franchise side and from just seeing how you guys have built that, I think next gen player movement obviously does benefit things, because I know you haven't talked about it much, but I mean, even the animations, right? Things like tackling, the way that players interact with each other, it opens up so many more possibilities when players are moving at a more authentic speed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I'm talking about player movement here, I'm talking specifically about locomotion, how players run, turn, accelerate, decelerate. But it's like, to your point, it's a larger system where all of these things work together and move together. When we talk about tackling and blocking and catching, it's all built on top of that movement system. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we were really clear about with our players is mastering the usage of the acceleration burst mechanic, the right trigger or R2 button on the controller. There was some feedback from the playtest that it felt very sluggish to turn. And that is intentional if you're trying to turn while also trying to accelerate. A lot of players believe that mechanic is speed boost. It's not. Every player has a speed rating that governs their top speed. What it is an acceleration boost. And if you're trying to turn while accelerating, you're going to get a car turn in most cases. If you want a sharp, more efficient turn, you have to let go of that mechanic so you can actually plant your foot and cut. And there's some interplay there, and there's a little bit of skill that players need to get used to. And trust me, we're all the same. When we play, we want to just hold that button down and run as fast as we can all the time. If you're trying to make very efficient cuts behind the line of scrimmage as a running back or cut up the field after a catch, you're going to want to let go of that button to get the most effective, sharp turn that you can.
And I think part of it with next gen player movement was described to me in the transition to Gen 5 and the philosophy that we're taking on. We hear the word slow over and over again. And I think compared to Gen 4, it can feel that way. But one of the philosophies was really opening up windows for the gamers to show skill. I think Gen 4 happens so fast, you almost have to like be anticipating what's about to happen and give your inputs. But Gen 5 opens up these windows where I can actually give input while the play is developing. It was interesting when we were building it out and talking about it, to me anyways, like, well, the plays are happening faster than they actually, that was the next gen player movement part, right? Like the actual next gen stats and pinning to what happens on the field. Like, and it's so fast in terms of a single NFL play that it's hard to tell. But, you know, if you're 15% too fast, then you're making decisions faster than even NFL players have to make them. That doesn't feel right. So slowing it down a little bit to get it back to human speed was a big change. And it does take some getting used to, but it does open those windows.
It wasn't just slowing down. It was resetting expectations over the course of Gen 3 and Gen 4. Every time there was a responsiveness issue that we were trying to address, usually what we would do is just like speed something up, scale the animation, make it move faster, make it more twitchy. And over time, it created some really unrealistic expectations in our football sim. For example, one of the more frustrating things for a number of our players was a user defender on defense could grab a middle linebacker with average speed and cover 3 or 4 routes in the middle of the field because he could accelerate through his turns and kind of run all over the field. And that became an expectation of Madden that when we watched it on streams or played it ourselves, it wasn't authentic. And so that's just one of the more glaring examples of why next-gen player movement we think is going to provide a more realistic experience. And while you could call it slowed down, I prefer to think of it as more authentic.
Yeah. And I mean,
totally fair. Totally fair. I am on record saying that a game where the meta is so one-dimensional as Madden 21, for instance, where your two primary metas were in the beginning of the year, especially on current Gen 4, you have the man coverage meta where you basically play man across the board underneath, and then there's no deep zones involved in the play at all. It was one purple zone set to a zone depth on the sidelines. That way any corner routes or crossers couldn't get open crossing the field or breaking to the sideline. And then obviously another purple zone on the other side that did that. And then typically what you did as a user was you watch the running back. If the running back stayed in, you had free reign to go and then lurk anything that was breaking over the middle of the field. And then you factored in the one step ahead. It created a really terrible meta. I'm 100% on board with that. Then you transition late into the year where the other meta is exactly what you've seen on this YouTube channel for the last 4 months. Every single video I did over the course, basically beyond the Super Bowl, was nickel 3-3-5 wide, purple zone set to 5 yards on both sides of the field, blue zone set to 25 yards on both sides of the field, a deep third on both sides of the field, a spy underneath to take away the quarterback scramble, a deep middle third, and one hook defender that covered everything, number to number, 0 yards from the line of scrimmage to 30 yards from the line of scrimmage. You move forward, you watch my video from yesterday, just a little bit of gameplay. First thing you noticed when I was facing that player that ran the 3-3-5 wide was that double Mabel stuff does not work. I'm on record, that is a good thing. It is a good thing that the user is worse. Now, worse to the point that it feels like you can't really change direction. It's better in the beta. It was better in the beta. So I'm not necessarily with the people that were in the feedback camp in the beta that said the user is bad. I was 1,000,000% in the camp on the 21 next gen version of the game where the user was almost as unrealistically slow on Gen 5 next gen as the user on Gen 4 current gen was unrealistically overpowered. So I'm actually with Clint on this. I think it is a totally correct assessment of what the game is in terms of the beta in that feedback that was being heard.
Just from personal experience watching, and playing on next gen, you really as a defender have to be anticipatory. The same way that NFL players are. As a linebacker, you can't just react to everything.
Yes, you do.
You have to kind of understand what's happening around you and be able to make those moves. And when you do, it's really gratifying. But I know that previously we've already kind of promoted the idea of not just holding down that right trigger R2 button, especially as a running back behind the line, based on the way that running works and the cutback lanes, etc. So I think that's kind of expanded out towards the larger game, right, Clint?
Before Clint chimes in, I wanted to provide thoughts on the whole turbo button behind the line of scrimmage thing. I think it's totally fine if you want to have us learning to, pulse on and off of the turbo button. But if that's going to be the case, there's a lot of spots in the game, especially defensively, where you have to get rid of those auto shed triggers from holding turbo behind the line of scrimmage. If the result of me holding turbo behind the line of scrimmage is one in which I'm trying to get through a hole that I have seen and I see it and I'm accelerating to it as fast as I possibly can, we need to get those defensive tackles and those defensive ends off of the auto disengage triggers that completely neglect things like strength, block shed rating, etc. So, if most of the negative now for holding turbo in Gen 5 is going to be that we can't change direction and we're on our train track, then get those guys off those auto shed mechanics. I think that's the only fair counterbalance. And I definitely feel those in 21 on next gen. I can't say that I experienced that as much in the beta, but those types of mechanics have been literally in the game since the game was on the Pirate Bay back in 2009. It was found in the source code when it got put online and got burned onto blank DVD disc on modded Xbox all those years back. So we know that logic is in the game. It has been in the game. And you guys can obviously see it, on current gen too. When you hold turbo behind the line of scrimmage, it causes defensive tackles to shed. So those are just kind of my thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. More strategy. And to Tom's point, in addition with the more authentic game speed, what he's trying to say and what we would like to do is give players more opportunity to have that anticipation you're referring to. Prior the game was moving so fast, even on the sticks, you were forced to be kind of reactionary and couldn't anticipate because you didn't have enough time to kind of make an informed decision. So moving at a real speed will let you feel more like an NFL superstar on the field.
One of the side effects that's interesting to me that I've seen people talking about is it brings defensive strategy back into it a little bit, because you can't just cover up bad strategy with a super linebacker being.
I see you, Tom. Thank you for watching my Twitter, man. Appreciate you.
Everywhere at once. I mean, we still want skilled on the sticks to be important for that player. And I think it's there. It's just, it doesn't like the balance is shifted. It's not just so much based on what that what that linebacker can do. It moves a little bit back towards play calling and adjustments and covering it up. So I think that takes us back in the right direction towards authenticity there. But it's never going to not be important to be great on your user and secure the tackle or to jump to the right spot in coverage or whatever.
And sticking in the realm of authenticity, and Nick, there was plenty of feedback right around Gunslinger and quarterback releases. Why don't you talk about that area where what changes we made, or what feedback we got?
I mean, I was enjoying listening to the soothing sounds of Clint's voice, but I'm happy to enlighten some people on the Gunslinger debate. I mean, we definitely heard the feedback around Gunslinger. Like, it is a strong ability. It's very powerful. For those who don't know what it does, it slightly increases the animation speed of your passes, so you'll release the ball a little bit earlier, and it also increases the velocity of the ball once you release it. So this allows players to kind of make some plays and hit some windows that they wouldn't maybe otherwise be able to the point where some people feel like they kind of need to have the ability to execute their strategy. And we don't love any ability feeling mandatory on the ability design side. So we might investigate some ways to kind of, I don't want to say nerf, but like change the way that Gunslinger works so that you don't feel compelled to take it. And back to what Clint was talking about with realism, like, we have QBs who, have very different release timings, right?
Yep.
They throw the ball faster or slower than others, much like the real humans in the NFL throw the ball slower or faster than one another. This is by design. We want quarterbacks to feel different based on their stats. Now,
Understandable. The only counter I had to that is that most of the throw out of sack animations are pre-canned, meaning that when a defender is unabated to the quarterback and is X distance away, the game is actually rolling dice to determine whether or not your quarterback is going to get that, like, throw out a sack animation or go through their traditional throwing animation. If I have labbed a quarterback out and I know that his release takes, it's not to the point where I'm like there with a stopwatch, right? Although people have done that in our community. If I've gotten to a point where I understand just about how many frames it takes for a quarterback to throw the ball, that pre-trains me over thousands of repetitions to know that, okay, I have until the defender is this far away from my quarterback on my screen until I throw that ball. The problem with the throw out of sack animations is that now we're in a spot where if I know that this is the distance to get the ball out cleanly, but sometimes that distance results in my quarterback kind of like spazzing and doing an animation that looks ugly and the ball comes out wobbly for an auto pick straight to a defender that's nowhere near where I'm throwing, then it feels forced. So I get what they're saying, much like guys have different releases in real life. Well, then figure out a different way to make their throw out of sack animations different as well, because it just feels random to most players.
The aspects of Gunslinger are that it can be a Band-Aid. It can improve a somewhat slow quarterback's release timings to something much better, easier to play with. It feels better, maybe.
On a comp level, it's simply put, it's used because it's the fastest possible animation that we can get to avoid those random throw out of sack animations. It's not any more complicated than that. That's just my opinion.
To avoid sacks, maybe you hit windows that you couldn't hit before. So we're looking at options. We're trying to see, maybe we tie some of that velocity into the throw power rating and take it away from Gunslinger. Maybe we look at some of the other issues around not throwing quite as fast and missing those windows. But we hear you. We're looking at options. We're not really ready to commit to any sort of plan or anything yet, but we're definitely keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I want to dogpile here what Nick's saying about Gunslinger. We've heard the feedback from players, especially the competitive players who want to see more variety in the teams chosen and the players used for competitive events. We are still formulating a plan of attack so that there likely won't be much of a change at launch outside of we are going to distribute the Gunslinger ability to more quarterbacks. Outside of that, it'll be later in a title update when we release some more info about Gunslinger and throw releases.
I think one of the interesting points on the debate about Gunslinger and the releases is that they're in tiers. So even if outside of, Aaron Rodgers, which I think everybody knows has one of the fastest releases in the game, most of the signature or all of the other signature passing styles have the same exact timing, regardless of what people feel about it. They are down to the exact frame, exactly the same for each depth, etc. So, I mean, it's similar, and timing those up, they're still pretty much significantly faster than how actual NFL quarterbacks throw the football. NFL quarterbacks throw the ball on average around 0.41 seconds on their release, and we're much faster than that, even with the signature and even generic is faster than that.
Right. And I know sometimes it feels like it's taking ages to get the pass out when you've got a pass rusher screaming at you. But the goal here, like you said, is to hit as close to an authentic pass release timing as we can, and to have tiers. And like you said, a lot of the tiers, like Aaron Rodgers, there are other people that throw the ball as fast as him if you take Gunslinger out of the equation. And Gunslinger is a relatively small boost, but when you're talking competitive players, every millisecond counts. Water finds a crack. They're going to optimize as much as possible to try to get the win. And, we can't blame them for that. That's always going to happen.
No,
It's not though. It's not though. I think that we're getting off track here. It's not just avoiding a pass rusher. It's literally the ball velocity, especially on Gen 4, was necessary because of the break on ball, because of the zone drops, because of the aforementioned, dice roll throughout a sack animations that look really, really goofy, right? It's a bunch of things. It's not just, hey, let's get the ball out as soon as possible. It's also, I only have this amount of time to fit the ball in that window too. So, and especially the one step ahead meta. That's the other thing. Your separation against one step ahead and acrobat, you had to be pretty damn on to make those throws. There's a lot of factors that contributed to Gunslinger being a mandatory ability beyond just getting the ball out as soon as possible from a pass rusher.
And it'll be interesting to see. I know that's like you guys said, that's going to be a big topic of discussion. What's the rest of the meta that forms up around pass rush, and how much time do you really have? Is it important? What role will the scrambling quarterbacks play this year in terms of power by comparison? So not moving too fast on it and letting the rest of the meta, kind of emerge and then form up, and then making decisions with the rest of the meta defined is an important piece for the competitive side of things. We try not to be too reactionary, because then you end up chasing all year. And I think if we look back in history, you've seen some years where we ended up chasing the meta all year. So, just having talked with you, Clint, it's the philosophy lately has been to be more cautious. Everybody's playing with the same game pieces. So from a certain respect, it's fair, but we always do want to have a variety of choices as people go through, and you want to see some different options on the teams that get deployed out there, ideally. So, but it is at least right now, heard the feedback, we're watching, but a little bit wait and see to see what the meta forms up once the whole game's out there for a while.
I really, really like Tom's approach. I definitely respect the way that he kind of views things and views game balancing. I've had candid conversations, very real conversations, both positive and over frustrations with the game. I would say that I appreciated the wait and see approach that EA took this year with Madden 21. But I would also say that in the ways that they chased the meta in previous years in overpatch games, and it caused more problems, the way that this game was kind of viewed was that they basically just let, frankly, a bullshit meta dominate the game until after the Super Bowl. And there was actually no gameplay balancing. It only became balanced when the MUT team came out and changed the APs of the one step ahead ability. So they let really, really solid man coverage dominate the game. Even non one step ahead man coverage defenders were good, probably still better than they should have been in man coverage, beatable, but still probably better than what you would actually expect. And then everybody just kind of ran rampant with the double and triple OSA thing. And, at one point you could stack so many one step ahead acrobats that it was just, the game was simply throw a low ball slant, throw a low ball in route, throw a low ball out route, throw a low ball this, throw a low ball that, possession catch. Like there was no actual like passing concepts that were actually working. It was just low ball on the cut and pray the one step ahead didn't dive and pick you off. I would argue that this year they were hands off to the point that it honestly killed the game. And I could say that from look at the YouTube engagement across all channels, not just mine. Look at the Twitch directory. I could tell you from Gridiron Game Plans, the number of people that sent me emails that said, hey man, love the content. You're awesome. You're helping me out with everything. But EA's not fixing their game. I got a lot of that. So just keep that in the back of your mind. I appreciate the hands-off approach. And I think that hands-off approach will fare better in a game where man coverage isn't incredibly overpowered. But just be careful that you don't want to do what Sony did this year with MLB The Show, because that game was broken and they haven't fixed it for 3 years. They've been hands off for 3 years. So you don't want to fall into that Sony San Diego approach with their baseball game, but you don't want to quite be what you were in 19 and 20 as well. So it's fair, but just please be a little bit more proactive this year than you were in 21.
Absolutely. Moving on to one of the hot button issues. I think these have already been, but this is one that has been kind of talked about quite a bit in years past. Catching. Clint, I know that it wasn't necessarily complete in the playtest. So
this is going to be a good one
on the changes to catching.
I'm excited.
Madden 22.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about catching in this podcast because I think there's some important things for our players to know. But like you said, it's one of the, if not the most critical system in our game. Catching, and outside of player movement, one of the other really voted upon pieces of feedback from the playtest, over 500 votes on all things catching. The top pieces of feedback were receivers and DBs need more aggressiveness in attacking the ball. Defenders don't always go for the interception or play the right animation when in position. And catch mechanics don't always feel as responsive as we would expect. Those are kind of the top three that bubble to the top through that feedback. And now I want to be really clear with our players. Catching certainly was not in a beta state during the playtest. It was pretty early. We knew that there were a number of issues in it, but what we wanted to get feedback on was our shift away from multiplayer catches. When I talk about multiplayer catches, I'm talking about those scenarios where both the defender and the offensive guy enter into an interaction, and then, for lack of a better word, you kind of watch that play out until the branch point at which one or both players get control back.
Think about the swerve. Go back to the swerve, right? The game was so desperate to link a defensive player to an offensive player catch animation that clicking, throwing the ball up and playing the swerve, that swerve glitch a few years back would cause the defender to give up advantageous position and follow behind the wide receiver and give up a catch. That is what Clint is talking about.
We have decreased the frequency of those interactions happening in our game and are leaning more on what we call single player catches, where both the defender and the receiver are independent. They're not entering an interaction together. And then they are basically either going to play the receiver, play the ball if you're on defense, go up and try to catch the ball independent of each other. And then at which point we can play things like catch tackles, which is a different version of a multiplayer interaction, but it's later, it's after the catch. And the feedback on that was pretty positive. But the thing that I want to tell our players the most is where we are on our journey with our catching tech. We have to make some choices here, and I wish we didn't have to make the choice, but multiplayer catches visually is going to look a lot better, but not be as responsive and leave the player in control as much as they want. That's where we were the last several years.
I have said for so long, that while the multiplayer catch animations might look better, they do not feel better. They oftentimes result in a player that you're clicking on and saying, don't jump out of bounds as you hold possession catch, jumping out of bounds as you hold possession catch. I have contended all along that I would rather have more control than less, because at the end of the day, I can get upset at myself for screwing up a user catch. I would rather be mad at myself than be mad at Clint and that dev team for building a system that gives me less control, but doesn't execute simplistic things like toe tapping on a wide open catch on the sideline. So I am totally on board with the more control, even if it looks a little bit worse in the short term, leading to a better outcome in the long term. That is more of an approach I've wanted from EA for a long time. You can't get going on a 2, 3, 4-step process without step 1. In so many years, we've seen that they don't want to take step 1 because it's going to look ugly in the short term.
We aimed for more control across the field this year, and that's why we strategically decided to go back to more single-player catches. With that comes some visual inaccuracies. It's not always going to look as good as a multiplayer catch, but it will leave you feeling like you're in control of the outcome in every one of those situations. I want to be really clear on that, just to set proper expectations for our players. And then in addition to that, there's a lot of work that has been done for launch that's going to improve aggressiveness at the catch point for both offense and defense. And we did some work around catch heights to make the max height that a receiver or defender could jump to match a catch more appropriate to their ratings and their height. And then lastly, the other change that we want to make sure players are aware of is the SWAT thresholds have been increased. So now swatting the ball as a defensive player is going to be more effective and more conservative than always playing the ball. Since we are doing single player catches, if you go for the interception every time on defense, you do have a higher chance to just miss the ball because you're not going to be able to match that multiplayer interaction. But if you SWAT, the range of the SWATs have been increased, so you'd be more likely to knock the ball down.
That is totally a harken back to the Xbox 360 era that I started playing Madden in. And as an old school player, that's not even really truthfully old school, but as a player that came up in that era, that is the best Madden has ever felt to me, is being on that in between of, I know I can SWAT this, but maybe I can pick it. That is a decision that I want back in the game. If you think about it, the last few years, there was no reason to press the SWAT button. Guys would just do this like volleyball SWAT, spike animation 4 yards behind the receiver, or play this like whiffing catch animation for no reason. Now that you put us in a spot where if I'm in the hip pocket, it's like, okay, maybe there's like a 20% chance I could pick this off, but I know I've got about a 70% chance of swatting this. Now you're in that situation where if I go to play that interception animation, I give up the ag, who am I mad at? Myself. Whereas in the current state of Gen 4, you're always pressing Y, and if you get dunked on, you get dunked on.
Sorry about all those words. I hope that all makes sense, guys.
No, it makes a ton of sense. And I think the max height and being able to match and knowing when to SWAT versus always going for the interception, those are huge pieces of information for people. From a visual perspective, I'm kind of interested in what you mean by that, just because I know that one of the pieces of feedback I've seen is that multiplayer catches visually didn't always feel great either. There wouldn't be meshing or things like that, but getting locked in, they didn't always look great, and there was some repetition there.
100%.
So when you say visually that it might be different, what did you mean by that?
Well, the big visual detractor for multiplayer catches was warping. And in some cases, they would slide into position, and that would make them look bad. But once we were in the interaction, both players looked like they were aware of each other. The outcome was contextually appropriate to the animation that played, so on and so forth.
But also predetermined.
We only want them in certain situations. So you'll see those more rarely. With these single player catches, what the visual issues that you could come across, let's say there's a defender behind a receiver and both guys are jumping up to catch the ball. They're both jumping up to catch the ball at their optimum catch point. And so the defender may get it intercepted in front of him by the offensive guy and not really try to make a play towards the receiver until he lands back on his feet.
But how often do you not see that in real life, where a quarterback is trained now to throw the high point back shoulder fade, which is going to get almost always this technique from a defensive back where it's like, it feels like he could play that, but then that receiver is going to kind of get inside position and box out and jump up in front of him and literally pick the ball off from in front of that defensive back. That is such a necessary evil to the game. And I think that's what Clint is getting at right here is you guys are going to have to get to a point now where if that's a strategy that you might face in Madden 22, you're going to have to change your zone drops. You're going to have to maybe play some different shading techniques to put yourself in a better spot. And truthfully, the game has needed for the last probably 5 or 6 years a true way to attack the sideline and give an advantage to a player who has lab pass leads, not necessarily just pass leads, but we go back to the release animations. While Aaron Rodgers might have the fastest release, sometimes with that different release animation comes a different trajectory. I remember in the past, a guy like Phillip Rivers, who a lot of people hate in Madden 21, Phillip Rivers had one of the best ball trajectory for user catching animations in the history of Madden with that goofy looking animation, because the ball comes out at a perfect trajectory for a receiver to be able to high point the ball. Those are things that I would like to see return to Madden personally. And I know that's going to be a very polarizing topic in the comment section. Let me know what you guys think.
If you were playing the ball. So he may look unaware that a guy's catching it right in front of him, but that's because we want to keep you in control and not just warp you right into an interaction that may or may not have matched the button that you pressed.
Yeah, that's been like stepping back a step. That's been one of the big discussion topics for years. And I think it always will be, is, visual fidelity versus control, and which do you value more as a sports game? So I'm personally have been on the side of control, even if you have to take some hits around it looking perfect as it comes together. And of course, we'll always do everything we can to make it look as good as it can be, but slowing everything down that little bit. And then that we talked about in terms of next gen stat speeds, and then giving more control back to the gamer. Like, I think, at least from a competitive point of view, I'd be super excited that I can now show my skills on the sticks in those catch point interactions in a way that's a little bit tougher before in previous years. So I'm excited to see that journey.
Not just that, attacking the middle of the field in the seams. The user can't just sit there and jet around and pick off seam to drag to playmaker to crossing route. If I get that sliver in the seam and I got a big body tight end that I know can flex up against a Tyrann Mathieu size safety in the middle of the field, and I get that sliver of field and I want to box out in the middle of the field, that's absolutely something I need to be able to do, as opposed to being sucked into that safety in the seam and being forced to drop it, oftentimes in the hands of that linebacker that was 10 yards behind the play, who just magically knew that the ball was going to be dropped and dove and picked it off. So again, important things that are going to increase offense and also reward players that have user skill. I think those are great things for the game.
Jump Nick in. Tell us your thoughts, Nick.
I was just about to tell you my thoughts. Just Goomba stomped right on top of me. Yeah, you're 100% right, Tom. Like, it's the eternal struggle for creating sports games of trying to hit like the best visual fidelity and like crispest looking animations that you can, while also having it control as fluidly as possible. And those two things are usually at complete odds with one another, right? Like, the better it looks, often the worse it feels, and vice versa. The full human joystick treatment where I touch the stick and the guy moves on the same frame doesn't look human at all. It's not believable. There's clipping and stuff, but it feels great. So
yeah,
a lot of the times we're kind of just like waiting on new technology, new developments that can help fix that. Like, the stuff we use for next gen player movement is an example of that. It helps us better tune that slider between like feeling good and looking good. But yeah, it's a struggle. And I think that we're definitely improving year over year, but it's kind of a decision we have to make when we're dealing with any feature, right? This might look amazing, but doesn't feel good. We can't really drop it in.
I would say that's probably something that franchise has to do as well, not in the balance of visual quality versus feel, but I mean, even for authenticity features, there's that line that you have to walk between something that is truly authentic and something that's entertaining and exciting to engage with as a gamer, right? Like, there's anytime authenticity is something that you're kind of chasing, there's a line between what is truly authentic and what is authentic in a fun way for people to engage with. So
yeah, I live on that line.
We all do. Really, that's the big challenge. And how do you bring authenticity as the best value add that it can be? And it should always feel authentic, but how much control and how much fun do you have to fight back into it if authenticity would pull you away?
Yeah, in a perfect world, we'd want to do both. We want to do all
for
of
sure.
and do them well, and especially in a sports game, right? Like, what makes it really hard is these awesome NFL athletes every weekend are doing something new that we've never seen, and people are sending us videos saying, "Why don't you have this in our game?" And we're sitting here saying, "We would love to put that in our game. We got to figure out how."
Yeah.
This has never been done before until this very moment in time. Right? Yes, we do not have that yet.
We didn't know humans could do that.
Yeah, the OBJ catch from a few years ago, right? Like what just happened? So okay, we got to figure out.
Odell Beckham Jr. ruined Madden. He really did. I mean, he ruined Madden for a 5-year stretch. I mean, after that catch, it was like, oh, we gotta, have those animations. Madden 16, that animation was happening left and right. It's almost as bad as the Tyree catch, if you remember in the Super Bowl, off the helmet. That started to appear in Madden, and it rendered itself into every situation it possibly could. It's cool, but it hurts the game a lot of times. When you start to pre-can animations, just because you see them in real life, it's not always a good thing. It might look good, but it might feel terrible.
I get that in the game now. So, and maybe we went a little too far with it's in the game. And it's in the game a lot.
So. That's what I just said.
Speaking of being in the game, Nick, why don't we take a look at some of the momentum stuff that we did in terms of tuning, especially for competitive modes?
Sure. So originally we talked about some of our initial reveals that for the dynamic or the game day momentum system, we would have maybe some different tuning for how momentum accrues in competitive formats versus in your franchise against the AI. We built a completely different formula for momentum for competitive, and we tested it and we tried it out, and we really don't feel like it's at a spot where it is good enough. Like, we don't think it's as good as the normal momentum formula that we use, and it's kind of not ready for prime time yet. So we are planning on making some adjustments to how momentum accrues in competitive, but we're probably leaning more away from the formula being derived solely from stick skills and user actions, and putting it more in just a scaled down version of the standard formula. The user-based formula, it got kind of weird. You get into some inconsistencies where the game wasn't lined up from a score perspective and a true momentum perspective with what people were doing on the sticks. Like it just didn't feel good enough.
Yeah, I think that for competitive, that's always one of the interesting things. Like, we talk about fun and we talk about authentic, and now we have to talk about fair and like completely zero sum fair from the beginning to end. At times, getting in those momentum is a completely authentic feature that that portrays what happens and what it feels like to be in the stadium. And you watch the teams and how they're playing, and you feel like a team feels like they've earned some advantages, and we portray that very transparently in the game system. Making sure that translates for the competitors is really important and difficult to do. So that's one of the more interesting design challenges. So it's good to hear we're taking a beat on that one, I guess, and waiting and thinking about it a little bit more until we're really comfortable that we're giving them a truly consistent environment so they can be testing their skills and have that all play out as it should.
Right. And the feedback from the beta was largely that, if anything, in competitive environments, it felt like maybe momentum moved a little fast. There wasn't really any feedback around the actions that accrued it, right? Why it went up. Like, nobody really had a hard time grasping that. It all just kind of clicked and resonated with people like that. This makes sense. It goes up when I think it should, and it goes down when I think it should. So if anything, we'll just tweak that rate a bit in competitive environments.
Speaking of competitive balance, Nick, and as you are the lead designer for the dynamic game day feature for Madden 22, can you tell our players how you built the system so that the momentum modifiers, the M factors, can be customized per mode?
Absolutely. Yeah, and this is really something that I kind of did as a favor to myself than anything else, but made this feature incredibly configurable. So every mode within Madden can use M factors and game day conditions however they see fit. If you go into
on the dev side,
dev side, yes, yeah. Not on the user side. Sorry, guys. Maybe in a few years, who knows? So if you go into a regular exhibition game, we have gameplay logic that looks at what's going on in your game. Is it snowy? Or is this a rivalry, et cetera? And it picks game day conditions that make sense for that game. And it picks M factors based on, some weights that we have internally to decide how often they should show up. You go into MUT, the MUT team is entirely in control of what M factors and what game day conditions you get. So if there's some that they decide are not great for a competitive environment, they don't have to use them. They will use the ones that resonate with the competitive player base, that the player base enjoys having around and feels like add to the competition in a fair way. And the ones that they feel like are maybe too stressful in a competitive environment where you're, really sweating it out against somebody else who's at your skill level, they just won't show those up. So same holds true for, how franchise uses them and, how they might manifest in the yard. It's really a pretty great deal.
Gotcha. I think we have one more topic that I'm curious about. Clint, how do you think playbooks are coming together, with what you see in the community playtest or?
This is a big one. This is the biggest thing. A little bit of a backstory here for you guys. One of the game changer events I've gone to over the years, I remember sitting in a feedback session and I was asked the question, just point blank period, by somebody. I don't remember exactly who it was. They said, what is the biggest knockout punch in your opinion that doesn't, isn't super like crazy resource intensive? Like basically what they're saying is like, short of creating an insanely awesome new mode, what is something that grabs attention of players? And I said, playbooks. What is the first thing everybody does when they open up the game? They go and they look at two playbooks. One, the playbook they used last year. What has changed, if anything? Most years, basically, if anything. And two, your favorite team's playbook. Has my Chicago Bears offense switched it all from the Dick Duran era? Well, yeah, it has, obviously, but that's kind of what it feels like for a lot of fans is like, oh, hey, we got Adam Gase as the head coach in New York, for instance, years back. Well, is he getting the Bears playbook? Or from being the OC with the Bears, or is he getting, even back to the Broncos? Kind of felt like a cut and paste effort. And so this is a really interesting question. Let's go ahead and hear what they have to say.
Where we want to take it as we go into full launch.
Yeah, Tom, always bringing the heat as a man of the people. I know our players care a lot about playbooks, so thanks for
they do.
As we saw, there was two builds of the playtest. We had the week 1 build and the week 2 build. And the week 1 build, it was feedback around our playbooks being changed. There's not really a bunch here. We knew that playbooks weren't done yet. By week 2, playbooks got a pretty significant upgrade in the playtest. And that was maybe about 50 to 60% of what we're going to have to offer at launch.
Good.
All 32 NFL team playbooks, both offensive and defensively, have been upgraded and updated for launch. And then what we're most excited about, and I know a lot of the folks who were looking forward to live playbooks last year, we do have an aggressive title update plan to get a lot more playbook content in for every one of our title updates. And we're going to have a lot more to share on the details there in an upcoming Gridiron Notes here in a few weeks that are going to detail out all of the new stuff in playbooks.
That's fantastic. I know that, talking about the authenticity versus the fun thing, playbooks are literally the authenticity side of things, right? Where we're taking plays that we see on the field on Sundays and incorporating those into the playbooks frequently. So I'm sure plenty of people are going to be very excited to hear about those live updates, especially for teams with new coordinators or coaches, right? I mean, you can get the wrinkles in general, but when you have a guy who's never called plays before now in charge of that, there's definitely going to be some differences between what they run week 1 and what they run week 6.
Yeah, that's always a big focus of A-dubs. Everyone knows Anthony White. He's our playbook guru here. The first thing we always do is look at the coaching changes, and what he does immediately is go watch his film of their previous stop to kind of line out their base playbook. And then once the season starts, we'll continue updating their new schemes via live playbooks. But we really made an effort this year to talk with players, talk with community members about what they want in playbooks. And we've been very aggressive at bringing not only real stuff, but fun stuff and more variety across all of our playbooks, and we're really excited to see what players are going to think once they get their hands on it come August 20th.
Nice. Okay. Well, thanks, Matt. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about on the gameplay front in terms of the community playtest or coming up into the launch window?
I think there's just one small detail I'd cover, and I'll do it very quickly. I know I've talked way too much today, but it comes up, every year about this time, people ask about D-line stunts and twists. They want stunts and twists in the game. I want stunts and twists in the game. They're a big part of strategy in the real world NFL. They're not going to make an appearance in 22. They're still on our radar and our roadmap. We want to do it, but we want to do it right. If we wanted to bring in stunts and twists as purely visual and just tell one guy to run one way and another guy to loop around and go the other way with no impact to the game, we could probably do that, but it would be a very superficial feature. And to do it the right way, it touches a number of things. It touches run blocking AI, pass blocking AI, obviously run fits and defensive gaps. There's a ton of new animation coverage that you need. Then you have to balance it. Then you have to figure out what to do with pre-play mechanics. There's all these different systems that go into making stunts and twists. And I just want to acknowledge the feedback from our players. We know it's important to you. It's important to us. We want to be able to deliver it when we know we can deliver a full user-facing feature that surprises and delights and meets expectations. And that's just not, based on our timelines, that's just not going to be a thing this year. But it did come up a lot in the playtest feedback, so I wanted to make sure to address that.
Totally fair. I love the transparency. I appreciate the honesty. Not trying to be that guy, but I've mentioned it a couple times in this video alone. Sometimes we hear that. And the question is, again, if it's a 2, a 3, a 4-year process, as long as that first step is being made. If we're fast forwarding to August 6th of 2022, and we're hearing that it's on the roadmap still, where did the last year go? That's kind of the approach that we heard, for instance, this year, a big focus on the playbooks is what we just heard. Last year, we were promised Madden NFL Live playbook updates throughout the season, and we got 0 of them. So it's just one of those things where it's cause for concern to hear that they're not in the game, because this is feedback that I've given personally. It's feedback that a lot of people have said. It's feedback that clearly made it into the feedback portion of the beta from lots of community members. It's important to us. It's very, very important to us.
Yeah, makes sense. We'll talk about, there's one that came out in the franchise feedback that we'll talk about at the end that's in a similar vein, like something that we're super excited about, but we want to make sure we get it right. So with that, stick around for Andre and I talking about the franchise part of the community tape playtest if you like, but we're going to move on to that part of the game and give a little update on what we saw and what we were doing about it. So Andre, do you want to jump in and?
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and pause it right there. You guys can listen to the rest of the Making Madden podcast. Again, I have included all the links where you guys can find this on your various podcast platforms. You guys just listen to the gameplay part with me. That is obviously the focus that I have as a Madden player and a content creator. Is I'm a big gameplay guy. Definitely go check out the Making Madden podcast. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart that I appreciate the transparency. I think one of the biggest things that EA can do, especially for some of us like me that have become jaded to the product, certainly over the last 2 years, 2 to 3 years in general, that you guys can do is continue to be forward facing with this and honest. I appreciate the hell out of Clint saying, stunts and twists, we hear you, still not there. As long as we don't go a whole nother year and hear that again next year, that is the goal here, in my opinion. I think it's very, very important. And I think it takes a lot of guts to be able to sit down as a gameplay dev in today's environment. I'm not easy on gameplay devs. Twitter is a lot harder on gameplay devs than I am. But I appreciate this interview. I thought it was well done. I thought that Tom championed the community really, really well there. I think that Swami is a rock star. And I think that Clint had a tough year in Madden 21. I do. I was not a supporter. I think that he gave us some cause to be optimistic for Madden 22. And I think that even the things that we didn't like hearing in this podcast, he explained the why. And explaining the why and the long-term vision is key. It's communication, and it also puts them on the map of being accountable towards what is going to happen from here on out. So for me personally, I'm taking a lot of positives out of this. I know that the video is coming up on an hour long now, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Just want to say, those of you that made it 59 minutes and 25 seconds, you guys are studs. Thank you so much for watching this. If you guys like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or complaints about Madden in general, drop those below. Subscribe to the channel. Check out gridirongameplans.gg. It's going to be your one-stop source for all things competitive Madden in Madden 22. Go check it out. I'll see you guys on Monday with our next video upload. Until then, this is Zayn. Get in the lab and good luck. If I could hit the stop recording button.